All right, guys. Thanks so much for doing this. Really, really excited for this panel. So as we just talked about, I actually want to start with market conditions and maybe just like set the stage a little bit. So obviously there's been an enormous implosion in the form of UST and the Luna ecosystem. So that was about $50 billion of enterprise value, depending on how you want to define it, wiped. And obviously the rest of the crypto markets have kind of slid. So what I'd love to kind of start to dig into here is how are you guys assessing kind of current market conditions? Maybe it's from a trading and a liquidity standpoint. Maybe it's from just a VC fundraising and valuation kind of standpoint. But what's your kind of on-the-ground sense of what's going on right now? Maybe Haseeb, I can pick on you to kick us off.
Yeah, so right now it's pretty clear that we've entered into, I feel like the collapse of UST had a lot of ramifications for DeFi, for stablecoins, and then for the broader market environment. This whole year, crypto has been sliding mostly due to macro and just the Fed raising interest rates. And the collapse of UST feels like it's going to have a lot more knock-on effects for how people view DeFi going forward. There's been a lot of credulity about how many of the things that we're doing in DeFi are sustainable. And it's something that we've been talking about for a very long time when it comes to yield farming, where do yields come from? You know, anybody who ever asked the question, where do yields come from? We now know the answer. It comes from risk. That's where yields come from, right? So if you were in Anchor getting 20%, you didn't even get a year of 20% before you were blown out. And now it's trading at 20 cents. So like you get what you pay for when it comes to yield. I think what it's going to result in longer term is that, one, there's going to be a lot more pressure to create sustainable models in DeFi. It's obviously going to cause a lot more carefulness and caution around investing. If you look back to 6 months ago, you saw a total frenzy with respect to investors in basically believing anything that entrepreneurs would tell them and having a lot less due diligence and a lot less care going into underwriting some of these new things that people are creating. And I think that's shifting now. It's happening already in traditional markets. It's happening as well in crypto. So I think it's going to take us a few months to figure out what the new normal is. But longer term, you know, I'm very bullish on DeFi. I think DeFi is going to do fine. But the more speculative and frenzied elements of it are going to get eroded.
Yeah, what Haseeb said around similar patterns we've seen in traditional markets cannot be overstated. So I run a venture firm called Volt Capital, so I'll take the venture side of this. We're long-standing players. We take a long-term view. And when you look at what was going on in the crypto market, it was not dissimilar than what was going on in traditional markets. There was a euphoria, there was frothiness. The valuations that pre-seed companies and seed companies were raising at, I mean, you were taking on pre-seed risk at Series A, Series B prices, okay? And now there's a safety margin that wasn't there before because the prices that founders were raising at assumed perfection. Okay? It assumed you would hire the perfect team, you would execute perfectly, and that you would perfectly find product market fit. And it's not there anymore. And so there's this huge reset, and this correction is incredibly healthy for not only traditional markets, growth markets, but also crypto. And then there's panic and some fair weather investors, fair weather founders that jumped in to turn a quick dollar at peak. Obviously, if we can't, and are getting spooked, but and are wondering like, is it going to be as bad as end of 2017 all the way to 2020? And it's like, yeah, well, if it's as bad as that last winter, I mean, FTX might come out of it, OpenSea, Uniswap, and then if you're looking more broadly at if it's going to be similar to like a 2008 recession, I mean, remember that's when Bitcoin was invented. So at the bottom of the bear market is when we see the real substantive, innovative building happening, and so we're more optimistic than ever.
So guys, help me understand something. Because on the one hand, I hear what you're saying, and I completely agree, right? It's the cleansing fire, right, where the froth is left and the tourists leave and the real building happens and everything. But one thing that might be a little bit different this time as compared to last time is just the sheer raw amount of venture capital that is poured into crypto over the course of the last year or so. I mean, the numbers are really, really staggering. So on the one hand, you can clearly feel that there's pain in the marketplace. Valuations are already starting to reset. The labor market has started to change locally within crypto, probably more broadly in tech as well. but there's still an enormous amount of dry powder, right, that's sitting on the sideline waiting to be deployed. So how does that dynamic work, right? Because you have the froth that's getting worked out of the ecosystem, but at the same time, there's still a huge amount of capital that needs to find a home. So how do you guys kind of see that dynamic playing out over the course of the next year?
So you always want to be thinking at the margin, right? Like what is going to be the marginal effect of lowered prices and or kind of muted euphoria? There were a lot of investors, when we might invest into a seed round of a company, and they would be like 5x oversubscribed. And generally, if you're 5x oversubscribed, that means that you're going to raise the price, right? Like it's not going to clear at 5x oversubscribed. And so the price would raise, and the price would raise to you'd get Andreessen or Dragonfly or one of these Polychain, somebody like that, to lead you around, and then you'd fill the rest of it with like a family office or a hedge fund or just some random non-strategic investor. It's the non-strategic people who are at the margin exiting the market, right? It's the folks who bought in at the $100 million seed rounds and realized like, wow, we're down on everything in our portfolio. There's just absolutely no way that we're going to make money on even our seed investments, which usually are the best risk return. Those people are exiting the market, right? SoftBank is exiting the market. Some of these folks who were playing in crypto, who thought that crypto was just a guaranteed way to make money, they're down massively, and they're like, look, I'm not playing this game anymore. Now, there's a lot of crypto-specific capital, earmarked specifically for crypto. That capital is not going away. It may slow down because people realize that, like, hey, when I go raise my next fund, it may not be $1 billion or $2 billion. Maybe it's going to be relatively less than that. Maybe the returns from my current fund aren't going to look as great. What that is going to do is it's going to take some latency until we see this vintage of funds run out of dry powder. So you're absolutely right. If you compare it to traditional venture, just normal equity investing, right now, people are already seeing, when I talk to venture capitalists who are doing regular tech investing, they're already seeing massive slowdowns. Valuations come way down. The competitiveness and the speed of deals is getting way slower. In crypto, it's happening, but nowhere near as much as it's happening in regular markets. But if you give it 3 to 6 months, we will catch up because this vintage of funds will start running low on dry powder. And that's when you'll see the full reset with respect to capital raising environment.
Yeah. What about from a kind of a market structure standpoint? Maybe, Evgeny, I can kind of pick on you here a little bit. One thing that happened right after UST broke was that a bunch of other pegs in crypto kind of started to get tested, right? There was kind of a flow of redemptions in Tether, right? And the peg kind of slipped to like 98 cents. The ETH peg in the Lido pool, that kind of also has wobbled a little bit and I don't think is fully recovered. So like almost from a liquidity standpoint, the market structure standpoint, what would kind of the aftermath of the UST explosion look like from your perspective?
Yeah, we've seen quite a few tests last week. So yeah, what you mentioned with Tether, with stake these pools on the Curve. And I think we'll see even more tests when it comes to, TVL in general. And this metric has been, I think, kind of abused in general on the investment side of things. And I think we'll see both this metric not mattering that much, but also it being challenged as a lot of liquidity would actually leave a lot of protocols. And that's kind of what we are preparing for on our side with the market structure. From the market structure perspective, we expect that, both institutional and retail people will basically pull out of a lot of pools. At the same time, because there will be much less interest on the trading side, it will be even like less interest into providing liquidity in those pools. And so it's not going to be a death spiral, but it can impact it quite significantly. So we do expect quite a big drop in TVL overall.
And have you guys seen, one other thing, having just seen multiple kind of market cycles in crypto, and Haseeb, you were kind of indirectly talking about this, is, what happened, and actually Chris Dixon in his speech, for those of you who caught it this morning, kind of brought this up too. There are these cycles of crypto where as the price goes up, it attracts a bunch of talent, it goes out, and then some people stay, and you get a lower base level sort of each time. I'd be curious to get y'all's perspective about kind of institutional interest, right, or thoughts or commentary in the wake of this big explosion. Because obviously crypto had already kind of been rolling over, right? Tech broadly had been rolling over, crypto had been rolling over, but now we kind of see this big explosion in the form of UST. So I'd be curious to y'all from an institutional kind of standpoint, are they kind of looking at this saying, oh wow, see, I knew that this was not legitimate, this was rickety and it was all a house of cards, or are they saying, hey, this actually could be a buying opportunity because maybe this isn't indicative of the whole system? Maybe James, I can pick on you.
Yeah, on the institutional side, most of our folks are retail, but I think what's interesting is for the institutional side, this is probably the first time that they've experienced a crash of this sort. Last cycle, they were not here. Maybe one frame to look at it is on a comparative basis. I mean, typically, crypto has viewed as the risk asset, so if it nukes 80, 90%, it's considered disaster. But in the public markets, like the leading tech companies in the US have nuked 80, 90%, which was never the case before. So I think perhaps on that lens, maybe it puts crypto on a more even footing. Like these are all risk assets. They are all at the mercy of like interest rates and central banking regulations. So they are typically have a longer time horizon and a longer attention span. So I think hopefully for the more enlightened players is viewed as an opportunity to accumulate.
During last cycle, the running joke was institutions will be here in 6 to 9 months, and then in every 6 to 9 months, we would shift the scale, and we'd say again, oh, in the next 6 to 9 months. And the fact of the matter is this most recent go-around, they're here, and it wasn't like, the C-suite woke up one day and thought, oh, we should get exposure to stablecoins, or oh, we should get exposure to Bitcoin, right? I mean, they've been tracking this thing since 2014. And it's been on the desk of every, just from like a federal perspective, like every 3 to 4 letter agency you can think of. And of course, from an institutional perspective, like you're looking at the Fidelities, you're looking at top, Fortune 50 corporates that have been tracking the cycles and episodic nature of the market. They diversified knowing exactly what they were getting into. And you can't, really, once that genie's out of the bottle, you really can't put it back in. It's a testament of faith, an indicator of faith, because regardless of market cycles, they trust that the entrepreneur, the entrepreneurial talent is here. There's enough regulatory clarity, which will start tightening at the heels of this bear market, which isn't anything that we haven't seen before, and that this technology is here to stay. And so similarly, just how institutions don't, leave public markets when the S&P is down. They're going to stay. The ones who decided to diversify are here to stay.
One other thing that's actually very healthy about these kind of market cycles in general is, there's that Warren Buffett saying, which is that it's only when the tide go out, can you see who's swimming naked? And I think there were definitely some naked swimmers in crypto. It's a very healthy thing because there are definitely seeds of things that are working. But maybe because there's so much money, there's so much capital, and there's just so much excitement, it's not obvious, right, until everything turns over. And then in bear markets, typically we fix what was broken during the bull market, we improve upon it, and that kind of innovation leads to the next big thing. So I guess like open-ended question, all of you in your respective spaces of crypto, what were you all kind of looking at that you were saying, ooh, I know this looks like it's working, but I feel like it's kind of broken, and maybe this is where we should focus our attention and energy when we have some cloud cover from this bear to improve upon, for the next kind of bull cycle?
Well, the thing about crypto generally is that crypto enables permissionless innovation, meaning that anybody is free to build anything they want, and there are no bailouts, right? Nobody saves you. If your thing is breaking or if it's about to blow up, tough shit, everyone who holds it is going to lose money. And that's exactly what happened to Terra. And so what you see in the successive generations of crypto is that the stuff that's older is more battle-tested, right? It's lived through more cycles. It's survived more attacks. And the things that are newer, generally, they're sort of younger. They're kind of in their first flush. They don't make as negative assumptions about what might go wrong. And so you see it very much in that if you look at MakerDAO, it's just been sitting there doing MakerDAO stuff for the last 3 years. Nobody noticed it. Everybody was like, oh, Maker's the most boring thing in the world. It's the only asset that was up in the last week, right? Because it just sat there and worked, and it did its job. Because Maker survived March of 2020, and they learned from that experience that we need to harden this protocol in every possible way to make it survive. And in the long run, the selection pressure of crypto, I mean, what economists often call creative destruction, right? This idea that the things that aren't sort of evolutionarily fit, they die off, they fail, right? The restaurant that can't keep customers in the door, it fails as a restaurant, and it goes away. And the restaurants that do manage to attract customers, they survive, and they thrive, and they exist for a very long time. In the world of crypto, if your protocol cannot survive the market fluctuations, people trying to attack it, pegs breaking, oracles going down, all that stuff will eventually happen to you. And if your protocol can't survive it, then it won't be around in 3 years. And so it's something that gets reinforced at the end of every cycle. is that there are a lot of things that can fly high when markets are good, numbers are going up, and you're not really getting tested. But when everything in a space is getting tested, you've seen an enormous amount of, we just in everything that we now call DeFi 2.0, right? I mean, I think Luna, you could possibly put it into the DeFi 2.0 category. So many of those protocols have gotten tested in ways that they were not expecting, and they've gotten punished. Whereas DeFi 1.0, I mean, who's heard of anything happening to Maker or Aave or Compound? They're just sitting there doing their thing. And we will eventually see what within the DeFi 2.0 cohort will survive and sort of enter that more stalwart category. But it takes time. And so there's a lot of stuff in this cycle that we try to stay away from that we thought wasn't going to have the same longevity.
Yeah. If I can add on, I mean, from Nanson's perspective, and what we're trying to build is a really great experience where you can get in and we're democratizing access to data and giving people the information printed that's accessible to them. And I think the UX will evolve even further than it has in the past. And I think everyone saw the protect button probably on Anchor and how many people clicked that, right? And like it's just insurance I think will change the game as well. And can we actually build things that regular people can get into and feel comfortable about? And I think that's what we want to show is both opportunities that people can get into, discovering things, and doing due diligence, and making sure that you have those tools in your toolkit that I think normal funds have. But I think we want to make sure that like every person in this space can actually use those tools personally.
One trend I'd be curious to get all of your perspectives on, and maybe this is when we can parlay here, move into the on-chain investing part of this discussion. But one message that has been getting hammered time and time again is we're building infrastructure here, right? So kind of maybe V1 of infrastructure was these great companies like the Coinbases and the FTX, these great kind of centralized exchanges. And now it seems like there's a push to build things on-chain, right? An enormous amount of talent, capital, human capital is kind of moving towards building these new financial instruments primarily on-chain. So maybe we could just define like, what does that mean, building a product on-chain? How would that differ from its kind of more analog counterpart? Maybe James, you had a great explanation when we talked about this, if you want to talk about it.
It is super exciting to build on-chain because every time there's a major technology shift, you change the infrastructure like from on-prem to cloud computing. The kind of applications you can build is fundamentally different. The dominant like innovative structure in finance, or I guess from a structured products perspective in the last 30 years is ETFs, right? Everyone's been very familiar. It's like so big, it's ETF bubble. And ARK Invest, very famous for the ETFs. And there's almost none of that, both as product and infrastructure available today on crypto. So Amoon, we basically set out to build infrastructures so you can create those kind of products, index products purely on-chain. What is the benefit of replicating that on-chain? It wouldn't be very exciting if all you did was replicate the same set of like rules, but it's just a different infrastructure. You got to kind of find the native thing that makes it possible, that takes advantage of the new technology. A key benefit of building a basket or index product on-chain is that the owner of those products actually own the underlying assets. If you own the Russell 2000 like ETF product, you can't really just press a button and get 2,000 shares of all the underlying stuff. With on-chain index products, you can. You literally press redeem, and you can get all the underlying products. That's extremely interesting. It's like you actually hold the asset, not just someone else holding a wrapper of something else. The way these products work is also very interesting. Like if BlackRock disappeared, as wonderful as BlackRock is, like those products are not going to work anymore. But when you construct a index on-chain, the rules are just smart contracts. Those are duplicated on every block in the future for Ethereum or Solana, whichever chain you build it on. The benefit of that is even if our team, the initial people who build the recipe disappears, that smart contract lives on forever, just like a Uniswap V2 contract lives on forever. If the website goes down because we forgot to pay our bills, someone can spin up a new website, a new front end. So it is immortal, which is kind of cool in the world. You don't hear that associated with software. Imagine an AWS instance that's immortal. That's kind of all the really cool characteristics about like on-chain products, and it's very exciting to build.
There are cons as well. So optimistically, exactly what James just said. And in addition, there's less bureaucratic overhead, right? Because there isn't that friction of getting traditional financial stakeholders to buy in, right? From a regulatory perspective, getting all the licensing you may need, the better half of a year spent getting all the TradFi entities that you need to sign off, right? When you do it on-chain, you can expedite that process and you can speed up time to launch. The other side of that, though, is the technical friction, okay? So you are going to be sacrificing some efficiency, and it's just a more challenging technical problem. And the great thing, though, about that is that it inspires a lot of tinkerers and technically forward folks to build and work on those kinds of problems. So, you pick. A lot of these systems are going to exist in parallel, and so you pick the trade-offs that you want for the system that you intend to build.
Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, this indexing idea was, well, indexing theme was, very interesting for us as well at Wintermute for a couple of years already. It's been amazing how not used it is in crypto in general compared to traditional markets. And I think that the main reason is like majority of people who invest into crypto, they basically think they can outperform the market. So I'll ape into that token and that token, like I don't care about indices. I'm just going to become rich. And I think now with this correction, maybe it's time for people. I'm kind of hopeful that people will start thinking, okay, if I want to get exposure to the next wave, whatever it comes, maybe it's smarter to do via indexing, and then I don't miss out on like basically protocols that will outperform, and not instead of like gambling on that token or that token.
I think a lot of the reason why index investing in crypto has not been popular is because everyone knows that like there's a bunch of bullshit in the top 10. Now everyone has a different view of what the bullshit is, right? But like everyone is like, okay, I know these three, I don't want to hold these three tokens.
Which ones, Haseeb?
Everyone in their heart of hearts can look inside and they know what in the top 10 is bullshit. But the other thing, going back to the question of what's hard about on-chain investing, the other thing, kind of again, speaking to the collapse of Terra, one thing that I'm sure, those of us who are investors know very well is the feeling of, oh shit, one of our portfolio companies just got hacked. And if you're a regular venture investor, this is not an experience you have, right? You don't get ringed in the middle of the night that like all the money inside of your portfolio company is gone. But in crypto, it happens. It's happened to us many times. And it happens, almost every DeFi protocol has gone through the rite of passage of getting hacked at some point, right? Now, it might not be at a smart contract level. It could be at a DNS level. It could be your Discord. It could be something else. But people have lost money, and you got to go get in there and fix it. And so that is another part of the difficulty of building on-chain is that the balance of power between attackers and defenders when you're building protocols on-chain is that it always favors attackers. Just this year alone, we've literally seen the biggest hacks in crypto history, and it's only May. So this stuff is hard. It's extremely difficult to get it right, and that it's part of why when I first got into investing, I had so much envy for founders. Like I was kind of like, I'm going to invest for a little while, but like eventually I'm going to be a protocol builder because obviously that's way cooler than being an investor. And the longer that I've done this, the less envy that I have for investors. I now realize that like being an entrepreneur in crypto is so hard. It's so stressful. It's so scary. You go through so many oh shit moments that as an investor, I at least get some sleep. And I've realized that as a protocol founder, it's really hard to get that.
But also the data, if you build on-chain, is available and it's transparent to everyone, which I think is amazing too. Obviously, our company prides ourselves in surfacing that information. But it's live, it's granular, and it's transparent. Everything that we see who the market participants are in any given pool, what the liquidity is, so you can have more indication about the risk, before you get in. And once it goes onto an exchange, we lose a lot of visibility there. For us, that is empowering to people, and it's something that we obviously, want to take advantage of, and we enjoy those benefits having it on chain. So.
Yeah, it's huge and a complete net new way to do due diligence in investing in crypto because all that data is public versus in traditional markets. The thing is, though, is you have to be careful not to substitute being data rich, or rather being insight poor for being data rich. You can't conflate the two. And so products like Nansen, and disclaimer, we're one of the earliest investors in Nansen, is they do a great job distilling those insights. And so that's the one thing I'll say to investors and also founders that are having their folks put up dashboards and really doing a lot of the analytical work is that it's important because in a sea of data, your ability to really wrap and give the insights and distill the insights you need, that's where the alpha is. It's not in all these data points.
I have a couple of different follow-up questions there. So I want to return to this idea of when you're building, one of the dreams, right, of specifically DeFi, having everything on chain in this beautiful way that everything's governed by smart contracts, everything's very transparent, and you're supposed to be able to understand systemic risk better in DeFi, right? Because in TradFi, right, when we went through the global financial crisis, there were all these conduits, right? There's a bunch of off-balance sheet stuff, and so it goes, oh, if this were more transparent, then maybe the downturn wouldn't have been so bad if we would have been able to mitigate it. We're currently going through a downturn. I'd be curious, how much of that narrative is actually true? How much transparency do we really have into these markets? Do we really understand how leverage is connected? Do we really understand where risk is because we're living in this on-chain world?
This is something that I rail on a lot against crypto. I think we like to tell ourselves certain narratives that are mostly bullshit. And one of these narratives that I think is largely bullshit is the idea that DeFi is less risky because it's open and you can read data on chain, right? First, I mean, to your point, we have to understand that data, and sometimes it's actually hard, right? Did anybody know what was the price relationship between UST and Luna, at which point Luna would depeg, or sorry, UST would depeg? No one knew. We had a kind of vague idea, maybe somewhere in this ballpark, things will start unraveling, but nobody really knew. And it was just purely by somebody kind of pushing this curve pool that it turned out the whole thing fell apart. And there was no way, nobody had any idea how to risk model it. Nobody had any system that could precisely identify the point at which this thing would fall out of its stability zone. Another thing we talk about often is the fact that, okay, well, in DeFi, you can read the code. Really what they mean is that I can read the code, right? You can't read the code, right? Most of us probably don't know how to read the code and understand what's going on in Solidity. Some of these things, especially if you're on non-Ethereum protocol, sometimes you can't even read the code because the code isn't open source. So there's so much, and look at Luna as another example, right, about on-chain reserves. Luna was obviously backed by, Terra was obviously backed by Luna, right? So there was UST, the stablecoin, and there was Luna, which was the layer 1 native token. And UST was backed by Luna, but there was also backed by LFG, which was this nonprofit that's supposed to have $3 billion of Bitcoin, as well as some other random assets. Nobody knew what LFG did. Actually, there's a lot of drama going on right now of people trying to figure out, where did the Bitcoin go? What did they spend it on? Did they actually use it defending the peg or not?
It's at 87 million now, roughly, yeah?
Yes, down from 3 billion.
Yeah.
So almost all of it is gone.
$3
Doe has claimed that all the money was spent, but nobody really knows what exactly was it spent on. And so the reality is that in principle, it's possible to have protocols that are easily discoverable, easily analyzable, where all the data is out there and they're fully on-chain. One example of that, I just talked about it, MakerDAO. It was a perfect example. It's an easy to understand protocol. Everyone knows how it works. All the data is on-chain. It's easy to discover. But most things that are new in DeFi, which is most of what the high-yielding stuff is not like that. And so I think the reality is that it is on us as an industry to make this stuff more understandable, make it do the work so that people who are actually participating, investing, developing on these things, the standards of what kind of information normal people need in order to interact with this stuff, it has to be enforced by us as a community about the standards and expectations that we have for protocols when they actually come to market and start taking on retail investments.
And maybe if I could be devil's advocate to your devil's advocate, right?
Please.
LFG is probably an example of something that everyone knew wasn't totally, I don't want to say above board, but it wasn't structured the way that it should be, right, in that bull market. And now, the next time there are reserves, behind a stablecoin, this really should be on-chain. We really should have more transparency. So maybe it's not that this is some that's a bullshit narrative, but maybe we're just not as far along as we should be, and we haven't been as strict on ourselves as an industry as we should be to put things on chain, right? Because like we're all talking about now, there are a lot of disadvantages. It's hard to build things and plug into this public infrastructure. Gas fees are high. The tech isn't where it should be, right? Like where you'd want it to be if you were a builder. But yet, folks are still doing it, right? So there obviously is some future that we're all building towards here. So maybe in like a more positive way, right? We're being this is a bear market panel. We're being like, these are bullshit narratives and this isn't working. What are, paint me the picture of what this could look like, right? Why are we using this tech that isn't quite there yet? Why are we taking all this risk as crypto founders? Like, what are we all building toward? What's the best version of what an on-chain world could look like?
So look, I wanna sort of jump on your devil's advocate. Is that like, look, I do agree that when you're building something new, it's obviously hard to do all of that, right? Like if you're a brand new startup founder and like, the whole world is looking at you like, hey, analyze your protocol for me. Tell me exactly what all the risks are. Like audit the hell out of your contracts, make sure nothing ever breaks. And as soon as it does, I want you to pay me all the money back, right? Like that's what the deal is supposed to be if you're a new DeFi founder. And that's crazy. That's crazy hard. And I think it's very clear that the choice that we've made as an industry, which is kind of at the heart of crypto, is the idea that, look, we do this permissionless innovation stuff. We allow things to try and fail. That's how we function. That's how we decided to build the DeFi industry. And I think that's the right choice. So to your point, it is always easier to start off centralized and gradually become decentralized when you figure out what all the levers are and how the way the machine ought to work at equilibrium. But in the early days, it's hard. And so what I'm advocating for is not so much that like, hey, everybody stop doing what you're doing, but more that I think we need to be transparent with people about the risks of interacting with DeFi that isn't as battle tested. There's just an ocean of difference between something like Compound and something like Anchor. And that was something that as an industry, we just weren't ready to communicate to anybody. And it wasn't something that we were kind of admitting to ourselves and to each other as an industry. And I think if there's anything that this cycle is going to teach us, is that unless we adopt the norms of being able to sort of look clearly at how these protocols interrelate to each other, we're not going to be able to grow the pie.
Well, it wasn't consensus around Terra or Anchor or Luna, right? I mean, if you look, there were very much naysayers that were saying from the beginning, under collateralized algorithmic stablecoins, we've seen this before, they aren't going to work. There have been multiple threads on the matter. So what's great is that it's actually mixed voices and a ton of people that were actually against it because of the open nature of all of this, right? Information wants to be free. It's good that we can all discern and make our judgments for ourselves. So to your question, though, like, why are we all here? Like, we're all fundamentally reimagining the systems and the rails, right, that power everyday activities for anything as simple as like payments and authentication, rather as unsexy or boring as payments and authentication, to how we listen to music or how we play video games, like what that actually means to our everyday activities and livelihoods. And so when you fundamentally rethink the foundation, I mean, this is only really a once-in-a-generation opportunity where something like this comes along that turns everything on its head. And so you have to have that surface area to innovate, to open up the adjacent possible, learn from the mistakes, and then make better, more informed decisions moving forward. And then the last piece, really, I just always come back to is this idea that with the internet, it was the first time that we were able to move information across borders without any intermediaries. And with crypto, it's the first time we're able to move value without any intermediaries between borders. And that is very, very powerful, and we can't lose sight of fundamentally what we're here and what's changed.
I would say I'm quite happy with how this cycle kind of ended. Like, in a way,
it's over.
Look, I've been through 2 cycles, so I'm not like as OG as some other people, but like what did 2017 give us? 2017 gave us ICOs, so we learned how to raise money potentially in an unlimited way, which was great, but that was pretty much it. Like, if you look at this cycle, it gave us basically AMMs, great innovation. Like, I'm still on the fence whether it will work out or not, but definitely generate a lot of volume and a lot of real interest. It gave us, well, all these OG protocols like Ava Compound, Maker, like that survived and thrived in this environment. It gave us new L1s, and we've seen a lot of experimentation about, what is scalability, how we can play with it this way or another, and like, can you build a chain that will transact with an insane amount of transactions? And we've seen a lot of like variations of that on BSC, for example, or Solana, and we've seen the trade-offs finally. We've finally seen, okay, like what happens if we do it differently? And so we basically see we have so many learnings from this cycle that I'm quite excited for the next one, basically.
I think one of the things that became a norm this cycle is talking about the benefits of on-chain, like the fact that the smart contract is on-chain and people can, by default, and people can fork and replicate and build off that work is just it's like, it basically takes a norm that we got from the fashion world and merged it into the world of finance or software. It's never been the case. Like the last time we had open source by default with Linux, billions of people across the world benefited. Huge, completely unplanned for. And that was not the norm with software, Web 2 software up to this point. That's what Facebook, Twitter, and all those things are like. They grew very large, but they grew also ossified in their own ways. But how many unifork V2 forks do we have now? That's like bad maybe for Haydn, but it's like good for everyone else. You know, it's like that's useless work. You don't have to replicate. That's perfect code that you can use. You know, we built at Amoon, we built our code base off another project, and we're happy if someone builds off our code base. And that just increased the velocity of innovation so much faster. And if there's one thing we need was just faster velocity of innovation. Now a 16-year-old kid from Kenya can literally build off the work that's all been done up to this point. That's hugely positive.
That's something that we can't discount is the onboarding, the sheer onboarding that's been done the past 5 years of these kids that are 16 and 17 and legally can't open bank accounts but have hundreds of thousands, you know, if not millions in their Ethereum wallets.
Yeah, that was actually, there's, I don't know, folks at Framework, but I listened to a podcast with them, and I clearly listen to a lot of podcasts, and that was an analogy that really hit for me, is just the speed of innovation and how much they broaden the base of people who can create financial products. Because if you had thought of the original track, like if I wanted to create a financial product, you kind of have to start at like a bank, work your way up to become an MD, create some weird esoteric thing that you sell into an institutional audience. And now, I mean, just the barrier of entry and the speed with which you can innovate is so much quicker. I want to also, you know, just talk about, you know, almost from like a higher level, right? Crypto started with Bitcoin. Bitcoin was a reaction to, you know, the idea that central banks had kind of overstepped, that there's too much manipulation going on in the existing financial system, and overall we want to create something that's more secure. I think you can make a lot of arguments in retrospect about why Terra, the model was fundamentally flawed, but maybe the mission was noble, right? Because I think you do need some sort of decentralized stablecoin, right, existing in crypto. And a big part of what we're all trying to do here as well, where there's great, you know, you have the, let's say, distribution of these financial products is much greater in an on-chain world, but also you get the censorship resistance part as well. How much do you guys think of that, you know, when you're looking towards the future? Like, how important is it that we have this censorship resistance that we have in our money, like our Bitcoin, but also just in the financial infrastructure? Like, how important is that?
Well, the thing that's ironic about decentralized stablecoins is that we don't really need them until we do. And you know, today, actually, USDC is, the experience of using USDC in DeFi is, it really feels like a decentralized stablecoin, right? You can transfer wherever you want. No one will ever stop you unless you like get caught in like a sort of, you know, headline-producing hack. You're probably fine, and no one will mess with you as you're doing your business, right? And the biggest thing that I think UST has done is, ironically, it has created the need for something like UST. Yeah. Because it's very likely in the advent of UST, we've already seen, you know, Janet Yellen basically making calls for there to be a more robust stablecoin regulatory framework by the end of the year. So it's very likely that the US is going to see some kind of legislative framework around stablecoins. And if I had to guess, it's not going to be great for crypto. Which, you know, our thesis has always been that decentralized stablecoins are really important, but they will not be used until centralized stablecoins no longer have the same affordances as they have today, right? If you get to a world where people have to be KYC'd to use a centralized stablecoin, or let's say there's a transaction limit, and above a transaction limit, you have to be KYC'd, much in the same way that a bank would collect data on you if you have more than some de minimis amount of transaction activity. If that's the way that centralized stablecoins get regulated, then we're going to see a renaissance in decentralized stablecoins. But until then, decentralized stablecoins have kind of been waiting in the wings. Right? If you look at DAI, if you look at Frax, if you look at these other large decentralized stablecoins, they're mostly chilling. They're mostly used for yield farming. They're not really, DAI is probably the most used, but most of the rest of them, even UST, never really had a whole lot of payments use case. Mostly they were just used in other DeFi protocols. They're just used as sort of collateral. That will change if and when we see a more punitive regulatory framework arise around stablecoins.
I want to maybe end here because we've been talking a lot about, I think Evgeny, you came out and said we're done with this cycle. But let's just say, show of hands, how many folks in the audience have only been in crypto during a bull market? That's kind of a waste because I can't really see. Okay, I'm going to assume it's about half and half. Guys, advice, because I'm pretty sure all of you on the stage now have been through multiple cycles. What would you say to the audience if you just joined crypto, you're kind of watching all of this stuff go down, and maybe you're starting to feel a little worried? What's your kind of advice for making it through more of a bear market than kind of a bull period?
Well, according to Evgeny, we hit the bottom, so you're good. Just buy everything.
Yeah.
What's my advice? The first thing is that, one is that crypto is extremely cyclical. And if you got into crypto in 2021 or in 2020, you probably don't appreciate that to the extent that people who've been here longer feel it in their bones, that crypto is very cyclical. And it's just true that if you look at the long run, like toward the arc of innovation, as long as you're betting in that direction, you're going to do fine. Look, I can't tell you depending on where you bought in, whether or not your particular asset of choice will go up, but the fundamentals of crypto actually look great, right? The broader decline that we've seen this year is mostly exogenous. It's mostly due to macro. But users are growing, adoption is growing, the technology is improving, transaction volumes are increasing almost everywhere, NFTs are bringing in a new cohort of people, DeFi is getting more mature, this stuff is getting safer, more robust, easier to analyze. Like all the things that we might care about in believing where the space is going is trending in the right direction. So the great thing about bear markets is that you can sleep at night a little better. Things are not as crazy. You don't get as much FOMO. You can actually read documentation or white papers. You can't really do that in bull markets. There's no time. The other thing that I appreciate about bear markets is that bull markets, it's all tweet storms. Bear markets, long form starts actually getting reads.
That's true.
So I look forward to doing more long form and reading more long form.
Yeah. One of my favorite things to do during a bear market is, and I did this especially like last cycle, was just read reports from the early 2000s and late 90s on the internet failing, or why people didn't need the internet, or Amazon.bomb, and just thinking how silly all of those people seemed, and then thinking which side of history I want to be on. And so that's always a great exercise to do personally. But really, when you're thinking about crypto, just tuning everyone else out, sticking to your guns, like really understanding, like learning, using the bear market to build your reputation with everyone in the community, to sharpen your own skills and understanding of the space, and really understanding, because to Haseeb's point, this is where everything's getting battle tested. So you're getting a front row seat to seeing what actually works versus what doesn't. And during euphoric times, you're never going to be able to see that. You're going to have to outsource your conviction and your learnings to someone who is actually in the bear market seeing that firsthand. So yeah, use this time wisely.
Yeah, I would say it's really probably the best time to actually use DeFi protocols, use DeFi products, because in the proper bull market, you're just like way too much distracted with the price, especially if you're a new user. You're like, I don't know, you are on this new protocol, you bought a token, and like you probably would be just looking at the token going up and then down, and not necessarily using it that much. I appreciate the technology behind it. And now, like, however more months we have of this, like, not bull market, let's call it like this, is just a much better opportunity to learn for a lot of people. And I guess my second message would be, I kind of hoping that it will also kind of that we as a crypto community, like we as a builders and investors, we also, like basically with the next cohort of people that we're onboarding, we will try to make sure that they don't get too slaughtered, too much like burnt on the next cycle as well, because I think that's not what we do that well yet.
First of all, we're not in a bear market yet, so everyone should just chill. Evgeny is a cautious person, but there's still hopium to be had. Second, I just share a personal anecdote. The last time we were in a bear market, 2018, I basically tuned out. I stopped following crypto. I thought, like, okay, this thing is just going to be in very, very painful, unfun mode for a few years. I'll get back in when crypto warms up again. And it warmed up again toward end of 2020, and I got back in, and the timing was good. But that attitude had a grave cost. I completely missed DeFi summer. I missed DeFi summer because I wasn't a citizen in the winter. So if you want to catch on to the next new thing, assuming it'll wake up again, you need to actually go through the pain and stick around for the hard times. And the hard times is great for all the things that folks have mentioned. Read the white papers, do all the actual things. Yeah, like there's no ROI for reading white papers during bull markets, because while you're reading a white paper, some PFP project just 10x and you missed it, and your white paper doesn't give you anything, right? So this is a great time to read white papers. I haven't read the Curve V2 white paper. I'd love to catch up on that. Stick around, build, and then next time there's spring, you actually catch whatever summer that's going to come.
Yeah, build and make friends too, right? Like this is the time where you're going to get people who actually care about the space a lot, and so you hear that from Chris and Chris Dixon. If you actually are passionate about this, these are the people that stick around. So, I mean, that's when you're going to build the best stuff with the friends that you make here.
Awesome, guys. Well, so misery loves company, basically.
Yeah,
make friends.
Yeah.
Awesome, guys. This has been a ton of fun. Thank you so much. Unfortunately, that's all the time we have. Guys, give them a big round of applause.